Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back after the holidays, and we're here solely to talk about the budget at this work session today. Hope everyone's had a chance to, at least review the topics that we have prepared for today and get ready to ask some questions and maybe even have a general discussion about this budget. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. And I guess we'll go point by point in the memo. We have several items that we just wanted to pay particular attention to today.
We do. Hope everybody had a good Easter. It's been a couple weeks since we touched base, so I thought what we would do, just to start, is to go back to section 1 and take a look at a couple of charts, kind of high-level summary charts that take a look at our proposed fiscal year 15 budget compared to our fiscal year 14 budget, just to give us an idea of base, where we're starting, where our 14 budget is, and where we're looking at going for 15. Getting into a little bit more details from there, and then looking at some of our financial projections in 5 years out, once we have a clearer understanding of where our summary and how we got to our numbers. So first, we'll start, and I may or may not go in the exact order that I have these listed, these 7 topics, but the very first thing would be on section 1, page 17, and this is just, again, they're summary charts. The first one compares general fund revenue, and again, it compares budget year to budget year, and if we look, fiscal year 15 proposed budget has just over $40 million in the general fund revenue compared to fiscal year 14 budget of $37.9 million. So we're looking at an increase of 5.7% increase in general fund revenues in our fiscal year 15 proposed budget. With that 40.062, you're going to see below all the different income lines and the revenue lines that make up that difference of the 2.1 million. What I would say is, just as a reminder, I know that Bruce mentioned this a couple weeks ago when we did the high-level overview. One of the things that we did in the fiscal year 15 budget is that we looked at using fund balance. So when we used fund balance, what we did was we added appropriated fund balance revenue back into our budget, as well as on the expense side, you're going to see that same exact amount in fund balance expense. So if we did not have appropriated fund balance revenue, if we take that out, our revenue really for fiscal year 15 is $39.2 million, which is a 3.6% increase. And all I'm doing there is taking the $40,062,062, subtracting out the line item, you can see the $823,000 in the fund balance.
Do we have what it would be without, I presume this includes the 11-cent proposed
It does.
increase? What would it be without that? Do we have that?
You take 11 cents.
It would be a decrease.
It would. 11 cents times 200.
Yeah, could you bring that tomorrow, please?
Sure.
It's $2,574,000
Yes.
is what's raised by the 11 cents.
Correct. Which is $234,000 for each penny. So 11 cents times the,
So we'd be at 37 and a half somewhere.
correct.
That would be a decrease.
It would be a
Right,
decrease.
I just want that. This includes that. It's not, sorry, I think people might misunderstand that.
Okay. So to go along with that, the very first thing we're going to touch upon is, so revenue. The revenue growth that we're showing, the very first thing is 1.47 million in property tax revenue. And again, as Marty just mentioned, that is with the 11-cent tax rate increase of just about $2.57 million. So again, without that, we'd be looking at a decrease of about 1.1 million. Some of the other items, and what I would mention is for those people at home or the people in the audience, if this is one of your first times looking at this document, as you see these line items, state and county share taxes, licensing and permits, these are all revenues, and when you go back to section 3, there is a page that's dedicated to each and every single line that breaks it out in a little bit more detail. So for those people who would like to know more of exactly what is in our state and county share taxes, if you flip back to section 3, you can see all that detail there. So if we have a little bit more time, we'll look at some of those pages tonight. But other than the property tax revenue with the proposed 11-cent tax increase, the other category of fines and forfeitures is really the only area we're seeing any growth or estimating growth. And of that, the 246,000, it's predominantly made up of our Safe Speed program. The transfers from other funds, in fiscal year 14, we have anticipated a $250,000 water fund dividend, and if you recall, a few months back, we actually updated our utility dividend and enterprise fund policy so that, excuse me, all future dividends are actually going to be sent directly to the CIP fund and no longer coming into general fund. So that is a decrease, as well as in fiscal year 14, we had included monies being transferred back into the general fund from workers' comp fund that we are not carrying forward into 15 in the out years. Looking below, so we touched on the revenues, so now we'll touch on the expenditure side or the uses side. Again, we're going to start with a 40.062 million. Again, that does include using 823,000 in fund balance. So if we count that, we're looking at a $2.1 million increase, or 5.6%. If we subtract that fund balance use out, we're looking at 39.238 million, or a 3.4% increase. Big categories here. Again, this is this very summarized snapshot level. As we get further back, you can see more details on these individual items, and you can also, as well, see it by category. You can also see it by department. So the primary thing, the biggest growth area here on this chart is wages and benefits. Again, wages and benefits, that includes right now in the proposed budget a 2% COLA plus one longevity step for 1540, all non-union, and 1605. It also includes the increases in the settlement of our police union contract that just occurred back a month ago. I'm forgetting what month I'm in, I'm losing track. And then on the benefit side, it includes our 8.1% increase in health insurance, our increase in dental insurance, and our workers' comp premium increase. And again, we're going from a little over 980,000 to capping it in our budget at 1.35 million. We still don't have final numbers yet, and we're hoping in the coming weeks that we're able to see that and maybe even see it a little bit under.
And Michelle, just to clarify, when you're talking about health insurance, that's up under wages and benefits.
It is in wages and benefits, that very first line of that 1.574.
What is the insurance down below? What is that one? 32,714.
That's actually insurance that we pay for buildings,
I see, liability.
injuries and damages,
Gotcha.
liability.
And that's an
Correct.
increase of 32,714.
Yes, it is.
So does the 1.574, does that correlate with the number 4 on section 1, page 10 of the employee benefits? In other words, all those percentage increases that are referenced in number 4 under employee benefits on section 1, page 10. Because it says wages and benefits are 1.5 million, but then these benefits that are listed under number 4. So
It's capped at 1.35 million.
no. That's just for one item.
For workers' comp.
But the health insurance,
Yes.
the
Dental
8%.
insurance.
dinner insurance, the public safety pension cost increases.
Yes, it's all in there, all benefits.
So what's that total? I mean, you got wages and benefits listed here. What portion of that $1.5 million is wages and what portion is benefits?
Okay. We can see that breakdown when we get back to financial
Okay.
projections, but we can jump there. It would be in section 7. And the best place to see the detail on wages and benefits is page 9. And in this section, of course, it has our fiscal year 15 proposed budget, it has our fiscal year 14 budget, but it also has a little bit more history so we can see trends, as well as 4 additional years of our projections. At the very, very top, you're going to see the base wages over time, and then in the middle of the page for fiscal year 15 proposed budget, you see total wages of $18.03 million compared to revised budget of $17.379 million. And then at the bottom, the second half of the page, you see the fringe benefits.
So if I read this correctly, out of the $1.5 million increase in wages and benefits, about $500,000 is applied to wages and about $1 million is applied to benefits.
Correct.
So 2/3 of the increase in wage and benefits are benefit related.
Employer pay portion, correct. And if you want to see the breakdown in those, in the fringe benefits, you can see
Right, I see
retirement's
it all.
broken out, right, for the state fund versus police and fire, FICA, health insurance, dental insurance, workers' comp, versus retirees are also broken out separate from active employees, so that you can kind of see that at a glance. But that page is one that I actually mark and always have flagged in all of my budget books because it provides so much data and detail.
And it's also a reflection on the difficulty of dealing with employees who, from the employee's perspective, the difference in their paycheck from one year to another is merely the increase in wages. But from our perspective, our liability is, Kristen is pointing out, is much, much more just to sustain a benefit that the employees essentially take for granted because that's sort of a guarantee to them. So we're seeing a great impact to our pocketbook, but the employees certainly are not seeing the same impact on their pocketbook in direct money, but just keeping the benefits level.
Correct. So we'll flip back to that summary chart on page 17 in section 1. Very, very good questions, though. Again, of the increase, so without the fund balance transfer in there, in total, expenditures for the entire general fund would be increasing by $1.301 million. Of that $1.301 million increase, wages and benefits is 1.574. So you can see the other areas are all pretty much decreasing.
Did you explain other expenditures?
Actually, I was going to come back and go through
Okay.
those. I was going to stop on contracted services. That
Okay.
line item, you will see a slight increase of about $170,000. The increase there over the fiscal year 14 budget, we just did a new contract for some new management at our Potterfield Municipal Pool. That would be one of the increases. We have some increased expenditures in credit card transaction fees because we're seeing more and more people are using that as a payment method. And additionally, it includes an increase in our Safe Speed for School program expenditures that we're paying out to our contractor Breckford. Then down under other expenditures, and actually I should probably stop at capital expenditures. You see there that we are decreasing what we are covering in capital expenditures for the general fund. And this is a decrease of $434,000. And that represents a decrease in our current year, fiscal year 15 revenue, of our ongoing revenue and our commitment to our capital expenditures there. So if we were not utilizing the fund balance to help cover and do some of our projects next year, you could see that our trend would be that we'd be investing less in like infrastructure and vehicle purchases and such.
So essentially, it's a reduction in pay-go.
Correct.
Because you can't reduce it for capital projects that have a short lifetime but are in the CIP for various reasons. So it's pay-go offset.
Yes.
Is what that is. Okay.
And then if we move down just a little further to the other expenditures, that's the only other line item that is reflecting an increase of about $430,000. In that, we have a lot of other miscellaneous categories: advertising and printing, rentals, maintenance and repairs, professional development and training. But the areas that are increasing are maintenance and repairs for PC. We have some items that were being covered by our COPS technology grant. So we have some software support that has been covered by a grant for 3 years that now we're going to have to start covering by operations. And then just an overall increase in what we're seeing in our software contracts. We have $15,000 included for a Main Street program. It's a new program. Monies there also reflect our agency contributions, and we have an additional $200,000 reflected in that amount that we're giving to the Maryland Theater. It includes our commitment that we were making there. It also includes a contingency amount of $111,000. And that $111,000 in contingency is to cover things such as payouts. If an employee leaves and they get paid out their vacation and sick time, we're going to have some of that throughout the year in the general fund. That's to help cover that. It's to help cover any of those other agencies and groups that come in, like the library did when they came in and made their presentation. So, and it also would be including any costs that we would need to do for recruitment of the city administrator position. So that $111,000 isn't going to go very far, but that's all the different items, and that is the one little area and all the money that we have set aside for that in this budget at this time. And then there was one other expense, and that's property abatement expense, but the expense is decreased at the bottom of your page. The income is reflected as an increase at the top. So that's an offsetting type of a item. All right. If we want to stay in section 1 and turn to page 23, what you're going to notice here again is the expenditure side of the general fund. And these expenditures, instead of a summary and a snapshot and just a couple of line items, you're going to see fiscal year 14 budget compared to where we think and project we're going to end in June 30, as well as our fiscal year 15 proposed budget. And here we're we're showing it by department and area to break it out in a little bit different way for viewers to get even more detail. Again, it's the same. If you look at fiscal year 15, the grand total at the bottom, you'll see the same $40,062,000. You'll see the separate line item again for the fund balance transfers. We want it to be as transparent as possible and keep that line item out there the whole way through the budget book as a reminder so we didn't lose sight of that. But at the top, the two largest areas are public safety, police and fire. So of the total $40,062 million, 19.3 is in the general fund for the operating side of public safety. And you'll see an increase in police, and there, on this chart, there are some notes at the bottom for some of the areas that have changed the most, but there's not enough room to include detail for every significant change. So what you see is that police is increasing by 5.7%. That's total across the whole division. That includes new positions that have been added, and includes some COPS hiring positions. What happens with the COPS hiring grants? We have 2 that covers a total of 7 positions. Once we get those positions, the federal government gives us a percentage, but each year of our grant, they reimburse us a declining percent. So every single year that we have them, our amount for those positions will go higher. So that's reflected, as well as the salary enhancements that we just settled with the contract, and the rising employer cost, as we mentioned just a little bit ago, health insurance, a 10.7% rise in pension expense, and workers' comp. And then pretty much other than salary and wages, there wasn't a whole lot more in police division that's changing. Next year.
The contributions to other agencies
Yes.
increasing 73.1, is that with
It's all, yes, it includes the $200,000. Without that $200,000 additional that we're doing to the Maryland Theater, there would be no change in that contributions to other agencies. That's totally flat.
Expenses and transfers, where accounts for the increase?
There is a note right underneath. It actually includes operating transfers, contingencies, inventory adjustments, and termination pay. And if you look, if you want to make a note, Section 3, page 53 is another detailed chart, and it just outlines all the different unallocated expenditures.
Thank you.
Certainly. And again, the biggest one there is going to be the contingency. One of the things that I wanted to note with that is that it includes our transfers to other funds. And in the fiscal year 15 budget, we have capped our transfer to the golf fund at $200,000.
which is considerably lower than it's been on an actual basis for a couple of years.
Yes, and lower than our trend right now. And again, as you look down this list, you see police, fire, engineering, streets, community and economic development. All of those departments in Section 3, just like on the revenue side, will have more detail so that we can see things laid out a little bit more easily. And again, the other area, we touched upon a couple contributions, unallocated expense, and then the fund balance transfer. If you flip the page, same type of chart, same time periods, but again, this looks at it by type of expenditures and not necessarily by department. At the top, you see total wages of the 18.03 million. You see the benefits of 9 million for a grand total wages and benefits 27.079 million. If you look at 27.079 million compared to total expenditures of 40.062, it's like 68%. So 68% of all of our expenditures in the fiscal year 15 budget for general fund are in wages and benefits. You'll see the same increase here under contracted services that we touched upon earlier. Maintenance and repairs, you'll see that as an individual line. The dollars there aren't that large, but the percentage increase of 13.4%. And again, it's those software supports and the ones that we were covering with our COPS Tech grant that we now have to cover out of operation is the reason for the increase there. The unallocated general expenditures here includes our agency contributions as well as our contingency. Let's see here if there's any. I think we pretty much have touched on each of these categories already. But if there's any that you had questions on, if not, what we'll.
The salary contingency, is that the 2%?
That actually is
It's longevity,
correct.
right? I mean, it
Thank
says
you.
back here, it's
Yes.
longevity, and it's a
It's-
lump sum put in there.
Yes, it is, to cover longevity step 1540, non-union, and 1605.
Okay.
And then the COLAs and the rest are actually in the budget in time to be included within the departmental information.
So Marty's question about the lump sum that's put in there, that was an amount already worked out within the contracts that we've recently concluded.
This 429,000? No.
So it's an amount above the contracts that we recently concluded.
Well, 1605 contract for firefighters has not yet
Not
been settled,
completed.
so there's one longevity step there. 1540, that contract was settled, but they have a reopener for wages and benefits, both in fiscal year 15 as well as in 16. So it includes longevity steps there, and then all non-unions, and there's no contract for that. Did that?
I have a question, but I'll wait till you're done section 1.
Well, that's okay, go ahead.
Yeah, ask anytime. It's a free-for-all.
Sure.
I'm basically here to help us understand, because
Yeah.
there's so much,
We don't have a
so much
discussion.
information for the general fund. And it seems like a lot of change from one year to the next, but it's really the same big topics in the same areas.
There are-
That repeats.
Two statements within section 1, and maybe for me, I'm trying to figure out whether we are attempting to accomplish within these workshops and discussions of the budget an attempt to decrease the proposed impact, or whether we're simply having a discussion about a budget that a majority have generally accepted the impact's going to be. And I ask that because there are two statements within this budget. One is on page 8 of section 1, which says that the recommendation to better sustain our operations and both retain and support our employees, we should provide reasonable COLA and pay step increases in the coming fiscal year. I get that. We've negotiated those things and included some of those things. However, it goes on to say we need to get back on a schedule for annual adjustments to employee compensation, similar to what we provided before FY10. So when I read that statement, and then if you read on to page 9 under the property tax revenue, it infers that based on our current financial condition and future year projections, you can make a case for increasing our tax rate beyond the 11 cents. So I don't want this body, the conversations that we're having or the citizens interested, to get the wrong impression that the steps or decisions that we make now within this budget, that the 11 cents is going to fix that for the duration of this administration. Because when I read that sentence, or I should say when I read those two sentences together, the assumption that I get from that is that we're talking about 11 cents this year, but we're not saying that that's going to correct the budgetary deficiencies for the next 3 years, this and the next 2. That based on this, there is the clear possibility we'll be back at this table next year talking about an additional increase. Is that a fair statement?
And that is a fair statement.
Like a 6 to 7 cent
and
increase?
A real possibility when we get back to the financial projection section.
And so...
With no other changes.
Right, and I guess that gets to my point. You know, I'm all fine if folks want to sit here and want to go through the budget and want to have the presentations and the discussions, but if at the end of the day there is a majority, and this is just, I'm just speaking as frankly as I can here, if the majority say the 11 cents is fine, that's what we're going to do at the end of the day because that's what the budget's telling us, and we're setting ourselves up for a 6 or 7 cent tax increase next year. I don't share that approach, and so for me, I don't.
Well, there hasn't been a vote. That's why we had these workshops.
There clearly
and had
hasn't,
these
but
discussions.
I need to understand if what we're doing here is we're having discussions about where we're going to find savings within the budget or additional revenue enhancements.
I think staff will be open to any suggestions if you can find anywhere to cut in this budget. That is why we're here.
I think that I can.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're here. We want to hear those kinds of things. I mean,
okay.
the reason.
I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to just.
I would like to hear him first.
Yeah, I don't want to.
To answer your question from my perspective.
But as much as an individual can sit here and find those minor things which may save, let's say, 2 or 3 cents, the reality is structurally, this budget, you're not going to do that and get to where this budget is suggesting we go. In other words, when you read section 1, it talks about the number of employees you have is down 36, there's 25 unfunded positions, and if the direction of this body over the next couple of years is that we put money back into the budget to fund those 25 positions, that we expend funds on additional project areas, and if we are planning on picking up both the benefit-related costs and getting back to annual adjustments and wages, that's clearly not the course that I think is the appropriate to set, because, and again, speaking very frankly, because right on page 9, it says while we grew from 36,000 to 40,000 people, it recognizes very clearly that 15% of our housing stock is subsidized, and that 25% of our population is classified as a poverty level, and it speaks to the notion that this 11-cent increase is going to be difficult for property owners to absorb. And I don't want this misgiving to be out there that the 11 cent now isn't another 6 or 7 cents, because just what I said a year ago, that this approach is leading us to a 20 to 24 cent tax increase. The direction that this budget is taking us is 3 years from now, we're looking at about 20 to 24 cent overall tax increase over that period to get to the point at which this budget is suggesting we be.
And I think the city administrator quite clearly in his message recognizes that sustainability is the issue here. It is an unsustainable economic situation in which we find ourselves, with decreasing property values, which is really our primary source of revenue, and really no other way to, which services are we going to cut at this point? Which essential services? I mean, that's an open question. It's rhetorical at this point. But I mean, certainly if any council member can find ways to make adjustments in this budget, but I think what you're saying is, let me finish that statement. I would encourage you to meet individually with the finance director and or the city administrator and find ways to incorporate those into what we finally approve. But I think the issue really is, like you pointed out, it's a systemic, it's a structural problem in the budget, which is that we find ourselves in a stagnant economic situation.
Since we're making statements here, I've never
Please, Mr.
accepted that this is what that this is a good situation. And I've never said that I don't think there's a consensus on, oh, well, this is just accepted. I think staff is going over so that council members can understand where the issues are. That's the way I understand this. Any one of us can propose ways to cut it, but small changes aren't going to change the structural situation.
No, they're not.
We're either going to have to cut major services, have a whole different approach to wages and benefits, or some combination thereof to make any significant dent. We can't just say we don't like it. It's going to be specific, very hard to make cuts, and it's been giving me agony for months because I've known this was coming down the road. You could see it coming. I just don't know who's prepared to do those kinds of things. So it's a very difficult situation. But I don't think any of us are for or want these tax cuts, except Lou. But
having said that, I mean, and I understand what you're saying, but is it not the truth that the vast majority of these additional expenses are employee related?
Yes. Yes,
So-
as we just
70%
covered
of 'em.
in that summary
Right,
section.
so I mean, when we talk about this is unsustainable, it seems to me what would be unsustainable is we have to make a choice, and it's going to be with staffing. I mean, if we're executing contracts with labor that we're bound to, and we make in good faith, and the vast majority of the out-year tax increases relate to the contracts we're entering into, and unless I'm missing something, what we have is a staffing question. I mean, is that how you all see it?
it's structural. It's a major staffing problem.
Well,
it's not whittling a
no.
one here, one there.
No,
I won't do it.
I fully understand that, but I mean, I think when we talk about this, as you say, Kristen, being very honest with the public, we aren't going to change the basic issue that you're talking about by cutting out our contribution to having fireworks at the fairgrounds. Those things aren't going to do it. It's basic fundamental employee issues. We can cut out all the discretionary spending in the world, and we're going to have these tax increases unless one of two things happen as I see it. Either, knock on wood, we get a substantial recovery like I saw out west and our tax base goes up, Or we do not fund a substantial number of the positions that we're calling to fund.
But again, to be clear, what's happened here is not on the expenditure side. It's a revenue failure.
Absolutely.
But people need to be clear, the revenue, the expenditure side can be whittled at, but it's the revenue failure that doesn't allow us to fund the current level of services without major increases.
Services and commitments.
Coming down the road.
To the employees.
And that's the one thing I would take it a step further, Councilmember Metzger. I think if the issue is on the expenditure side, then I think you're talking services and programs and facilities. Because we've cut staff, we've frozen the wages for 4 years.
No, and we can't continue freezing wages, and you let us know that from the get-go. So, I mean, you can only tell people they're not going to get any wage increase for so long. In the same respect, yeah, we're starting to fill in positions that we have to relook at, but I agree with you. I mean, these are going to be big cuts. They're either big cuts or tax increases, but it's not going to be a nice, gentle, cut out a couple things here that nobody notices, and that takes care of our problem.
And one reason why the message says you could make a case for a higher tax increase is if you look at the projections, that supports that. Also, we balance the budget using general fund reserves, which is not a healthy thing to do.
It's never been done before.
So both of those suggest that there's a case that could be made for a higher tax increase. We're not dealing with anything new. I think you had a budget work session in December, and Councilmember Munson said no one would accuse me of ever being Santa Claus, and the projections were there in December of 12. You started working on this budget in August and September, and this issue's been in front of us for some time. So this budget is a product of all that work over the last year and a half or so.
Combined with the consecutive property value declines of the 11.2% and the 7.8%. And when you look at that together, that is a huge revenue base to overcome.
And I
Huge
think
revenue
it's-
deficit.
And I do think it's
overcome.
important to have these open discussions about our current situation and where we're going in the future, what our priorities are, and how we can pay for them. That's really the point of these budget work sessions, and also to educate the public and members of council who aren't as sophisticated in their budget acumen as Councilmember Alshire about what the situation is and what we're looking at in terms of the budget picture. So I don't want these meetings to be a waste of time by any means, and I don't think the point is to rubber stamp anything either. I really do appreciate productive conversations. So,
So I guess when does the discussion start, instead of just the general overview on the budget about
If you feel
members'
you're
thought
familiar with the
processes?
budget,
And you're-
let's start the discussion now.
Now,
If
you're ready.
If you're comfortable with what's in the numbers, then let's start now. That would certainly help staff.
I think it's a good time, because one of my concerns is, and all of us have seen it in the past, and that's that we continue with this method, and about 4 weeks from now, somebody's saying, we never even had a discussion about the budget, and have problems at that stage of the game, and I certainly don't want to see that happen.
Well, Lou, I think it would be useful, though, to go to the financial projections.
I have no,
Because I think that gives us an idea of what's coming down the road before we go back.
I have no problem
That's
with
one
that.
part, and I think that's next.
it happens to
in
be
your
next on the
presentation.
list.
Yeah.
It is.
I think that's particularly useful to look at. It's food for
Okay.
thought.
it is. I wanted to start us with a summary just to compare 15 proposed versus fiscal year 14 budget, to give us a base of what was included in the proposed fiscal year 15 budget.
What page?
And then we can flip to financial projections in section 7.
Before we do that, let me just reiterate something. I think Marty's last statement is absolutely correct, but as a person who has previously worked in government in the state and then come to this position, one of the most interesting things, or different things, is, and this is just a reiteration, but it needs to be said again and again and again, is the lack of available tax base. On the state level, even under the worst of circumstances, there was still money flowing into the coffers. And you could always find $1 million for something, even during the worst recessions. But here, where your tax base essentially is the only the property tax, when that property tax falls, there's nothing else to depend on except cutting. And once you've cut this essential services, which happened several years ago, then it's really tough to continue those cuts, in my view, and to keep the doors open, or have a reason to keep the doors open. I don't think anybody likes the direction this budget's going on. Kristen's certainly pointed that out, but that's what it is. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
If we flip to page 3, and the financial projections, and just keeping with the theme of this evening, we'll stick just with the general fund. The very first page is, again, it's a somewhat of a summary level. It's strictly revenues so that we can see. In the middle of the page, you see your fiscal year 15 proposed budget. You see a column right next to it that says projected change. And in that column, I just wanted to point out, I'm not sure if we've ever taken the time to actually stop and discuss this, but in that column, if you see the letter S, it means that there is a separate schedule. So there is a separate, more detailed schedule on those numbers and on those projections within Section 7, probably within a page or two behind here. So that if you're interested in drilling down, say on property taxes, we can turn the page, we can look to see if it's corporate personal property tax versus the real estate versus homestead tax credit. But again, probably for this discussion, fiscal year 15 budget, let's just start there and work our way through the numbers. Property taxes and payment in lieu. That number of 20, just right under 26 million, it's $25.95 million. And just, again, just to reiterate how much we are dependent upon that property tax base. That's $25.95 million out of a grand total revenue. And I'm going to, for this purpose, I'm not looking at the fund balance. Our revenue would be $39.93 million. So you can see well over 60% of our revenue in our fiscal year 15 budget continues to be our property tax revenue. And again, we have separate schedules for our projections. So in the fiscal year 15, in that $25.95 million, there is included a proposed tax rate increase of 11 cents. And then if we make changes in the fiscal year 15 budget to those numbers, that will impact our out years of 16, 17, 18, and 19. Because in those out years right now, in this projection, there is no additional tax rate increases. There's slight growth, and those growth is, one, being optimistic, and two, if we look at history and look at our fiscal year 12 actual, when we took a decrease in expense, the very next year, we had an increase and then another slight increase. So again, 15 is based and assumed 11% tax rate increase, followed by some slight growth in the out years, but no further an additional tax rate increase in these projections at this point. Yes, Marty?
I have a question about the pilots.
Yes.
Does anybody recall, it's been, from time to time, it's been looked at where we mandated a pilot on nonprofits. I believe we've looked at that at one time. Have we not?
I think we've discussed
kind of
it.
a general discussion.
I don't know, and recently, but what legal status does that kind of effort have? Have we discovered that?
Have to go back and do some research on that. It's been several years since we
Right.
looked at the idea of
But I know
pilots from nonprofits.
It's been talked about.
And municipalities do have the authority to enter into these pilot agreements. But for the sake of this discussion, if we have existing nonprofits and we don't have a pilot currently in existence, we'd have to research, and then we'd have to weigh that on, now that the companies are here and we're not assessing that, do we do an agreement with every single?
Well, yeah, enter in, that's a voluntary two-way street. I'm talking
Correct.
about to what extent can we require? Does anybody in Maryland, there are places in the United States, I think, where you can do that. I don't know if you can do that.
How about a calls for service trigger?
I don't know, but yeah, I don't know, there might be triggers in other ways of service fees. That could be one, yeah. But I'm just trying to think, we have so much nonprofit land, and we got to provide services there. Hate to do that, but it's a huge part, and I think we have more nonprofit proportionally than the area, the remainder of the county.
We can certainly do more research on that and bring that back. And speaking of pilots, what we'll do is we'll turn to page 5.
I mean, that's the kind of structural change.
No, that is certainly a structural
Look at.
change. That's exactly what we're hoping to discuss. On page 5, at the bottom of this page, this is that same 25.95 million we saw on 2 lines. Now you see a little bit more detail. Halfway down the page, you'll see our existing pilot agreements that we have. And you can see there's only, aside from our other city enterprise funds, we only have 4.
But Michelle, that's a good area to point out just how reliant we are on these pilots from electric, water, and wastewater.
Correct, absolutely. The transfers,
Over $2 million in revenue to the general fund is simply a pilot.
And pilot.
To those 3 utilities,
the utility.
which doesn't include the administrative allocation to those utilities.
Absolutely. I was actually just going to say that. So of our 2.7 million that we have right now in pilot revenue, the majority of that is all from our internal city enterprise funds. I'm going to flip us back to page 3. So that's property taxes at the top. Next section is state and county share taxes. And their income tax, most of these we have no control over. What you're going to see is projected change is just a historical trending, or where we think that reasonably we can see increases into the future. Income tax revenue, that's one area that we didn't really see a huge drop. It's been fairly steady. We're estimating we're going to end the current year in fiscal year 15 budget where we actually ended fiscal year 13, and that's just right at 2.3 million with slight growth in the out years.
And we don't plan on any highway user revenue, we just are grateful for whatever they throw at us?
Highway user revenue in the past, the reason that this is still here, this is highway user revenue funds that we would put directly into the general fund. We stopped doing that practice in fiscal year 12, and now 100% of all of our highway user revenue is dedicated strictly for our CIP fund.
For pavement
For pavement,
preservation.
for our capital, right, for our capital projects. Primarily pavement preservation, so that we don't rely on that on an operational standpoint.
In a sense, it uses pay-go in the CIP
Right.
instead of putting in here.
Does the
Because we
city-
can't rely on the amount, is the idea.
Right.
Yes.
Does the city, we don't have the right to impose our own additional room tax, do we?
Room tax?
Room tax for hotels in the city
I don't
limits?
think so.
I think that this body, the city of Hagerstown, needs to have more of a discussion with the county and CVB on increasing the room tax in order to create some revenue for projects that we all want to get done. Whatever those are, whether it's a hotel with a heritage center and visitor Civil War thing, maybe that's a good project, but if we're going to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish, we have to look for other revenue sources other than our general fund. And I think, just looking at that room tax there reminds me of that discussion that we had prior to or during the stadium talks. But that is still out there, and it seemed like there was some support for that, at least, some personal discussions with county commissioners I've had with that, and hopefully we can get the delegation on board. But that seems to be an easy an easy one where you could look for, mutually agreeable projects and then go for that revenue to try to pay for them.
Well, there's two approaches. One is increasing the tax, the other is increasing the proportion. The total receipts are approaching
Right.
$2 million, I believe.
Right.
Of which
But the point
we get
is,
about 165,000. So I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
Sorry.
we're 25% of the county, and we have a lot of hotel rooms. 45%.
Right.
but the point is that somebody else, other than the citizens of Washington County, are paying that room tax.
Right.
At least 90 to 95%
Right.
of it,
Right.
not us.
And those are feet on the street. It's people spending money in local restaurants and shops. I mean, that is truly what it's all about. And if I could, just as an aside, a dozen kids from Boone, North Carolina, for instance, this is how tourism works, I guess, in a nonprofit's adventure service-based program on spring break, going on their way up to New York City to help rebuild from the Sandy disaster. And their bus breaks down, and where they land in Hagerstown. So they're out by the outlets, and for some reason, this person decided to contact the mayor to figure out what to do. And I happened to be checking email and saw, but the very fine folks at the CVB were good enough to be able to hook them up with a room across from the outlets at a discounted rate. But they put the word out to the partners that the CVB has. And this community came through. And, there's a dozen kids plus 3 staff people who go home to Boone, North Carolina and talk about what great hospitality they had here in Hagerstown and, how caring the community is. And that is, you can't pay for that kind of advertising when it comes to trying to build economic development. So really, I mean, we are looking for ways to grow the tax base. And sometimes you have to spend some money in order to make some money, I guess. That's the old bottom line. So anyway, I just wanted to go on that aside.
Under the needed revenue source for 16 through 19, is that a net or gross for each of those years? In other words, you see an additional $3.5 million in 16. I'm assuming what that means is that's above the $3.5 million increase that would be raised through tax increase this year.
Okay.
Is that,
And we can jump to that.
or is
So
that a net amount?
in fiscal year 16, you see the line again, and it's 3.5 million. That means if we take that 3.5 million out with all the assumptions and the estimates that are in here, and again, fiscal year 16, let's see here, it reflects current funding, equipment funding and CIP transfers, very minimal growth in current revenue sources, overall preliminary estimate of 4.9% increase for all payroll-related costs, that's salaries plus the benefits, the growing debt service to fund the priority projects and cover overall inflationary factors. So if nothing else changes, and fiscal year 15 base stays the same,
And the 11 cent doesn't exist.
And 16, with the 11 cents.
With
and
the 11 cents.
Yes, and 16 stays with all the expenditures that's currently, again, very preliminary in our projections, then that's what we would need.
We would need another 11 cents. And my question is, when you go to 17, it's $4 million. Is that $4 million above the $3.5 million or above the additional 11 cents? Or is it a net amount? In other words, if we put the 3.5 million in this year,
Is it 4 million or is
we
it
put
a half
another
a million?
3.5 million in the next year, is it a $500,000 or is it another 4 million the next year?
It's a half, because if you add that 3.5 somewhere, you're gonna add it up in one of either the revenue lines, or
So
you're
really
gonna
the
take,
4 million
or you're
is
gonna take
half
it
a
out of
million.
one of the expenses. Correct. It's just that year based on where we are right now. So if we,
Okay.
and again, these are all preliminary, and I'm kind of trying to work down from the top so that we start with the revenue of what we can do, what we have the authority to do. Is there estimates in here that you think are wrong? You think, 2.3% growth in property tax? Absolutely not. It should be higher. I mean, we're just
We need to
looking.
look at the expenditure side.
Yes, and
before we
that's-
See how
what we-
valid that
Absolutely.
3 point,
Yeah.
Absolutely,
how valid
because
we think that 3.5.
You've got to look at both
I'm just
pages.
asking a simple question, whether that's 3.5 is separate from the 4, or whether the 4 includes the 3.5
and that 4 would, in this case, include
Okay.
that 3.5.
in the out years,
And the out
but
years.
not for this year to next year.
Correct.
So there's a reasonable chance of smoothing that out some.
Yes, there
That's what I
is.
would say.
2 years from now.
Spreading it out, pushing it.
And Michelle, I think everybody's got it. Your 11 cents is in the 14-15 number, and then it carries forward into 15-16 up on top of the revenue.
At the very
projection.
top, in the 25.952, that includes the proposed 11-cent tax rate increase. It's that same 25 million that we looked at and talked about in section 3 and in section 1. So it's there as our base, and then forwards in our 16, 17, 18, 19. And again, the 11 cents is in 15, but there is no additional, in these projections, no additional tax rate increase in
Right.
any of the other 4 out years.
Okay.
Okay. When we get down to some of the other categories, between property tax revenue and state and county share taxes, that accounts for just under 29.5 million, or just right about 30 million of all of our revenues. The other areas include the big areas. So below we see that admin allocation of $2 million. Again, Bruce has touched upon that. That's an administrative allocation that we're charging our other city enterprise funds. Electric, water, wastewater, property management. Right below that, you see refuse service fees for our recycling, our trash. That's at 2.264 million. And then really, the other numbers are very small until you get to safe speed for school. And it is in 15, 1.8. And then in the projections in the out years, we're looking at it decreasing back to fiscal year 13 level of 1.6. And then another possible drop in 18 and 19. And those are very preliminary because this program is still so new. We're expecting people's changing behaviors to occur in their driving patterns, and we just don't know yet with our crystal ball when to project that that's going to happen.
And who
Or
knows what the
it
state
could
is
actually
gonna
happen
do.
in 15. Or, yes, additional
Or the
changes by the
impact
state
of the new
legislation.
legislation, yeah.
Correct. But that's the big category. So then once we have the base for 15, to carry it over to 16, it's either those inflationary and those percentage increases or a separate schedule. So that's the revenue. So if we flip the page, let's take a look at the expense side. The very top is the wages and benefits. And what I would say there is, again, you see the total in wages and benefits for proposed 15 budget, 27.079 million. It's 68% of our total $40 million. With additional increases in employer-covered pensions, health insurance, dental into fiscal year 16, we're looking at another increase from 27.1 million to 28.4 million. And we can, if we want to stop there and look at that page that we briefly touched on, to go through like the wages and the benefits.
Could you said there's this separate schedule for grants and other revenues. What page is that? Is that on,
It is, we have to pass off property revenue. It is on page 8.
thank you.
You're welcome. And we can spend some time on that. Our grants have been, they've actually been dwindling. Most of our grants we account for in a separate grant fund. However, we do have these new federal COPS hiring grants, and we are tracking them within the general fund because the only thing that it's covering is a portion of positions, and again, it's on a declining basis. And we do have a very good way in our computer system to go ahead and track all that so that everything is all within the general fund. So we know at any given point in time, the total cost of those positions, how much we've paid, how much reimbursement we're getting. And without the COPS hiring grants, you can see there's really hardly any other grants other than our school resource officers program that we currently have. The grants are at the top, and then below there we have these miscellaneous and other revenue sources. One of the things I talked about briefly was a transfer from workers' comp. That is something that we did not carry into the future with rising workers' comp premiums and possible changes in the future. I don't know that the direction that I felt comfortable with was continuing to move monies from that workers' comp fund back into the general fund. So that's why that was removed in the out years. And again, the water fund dividend, we've left it because it's the way that we had it in our budget, and we had approved it for fiscal year 14. But with our new enterprise dividend fund policy that we did, the dividends that would be declared would all go directly to the CIP fund and dedicated for economic development type projects. So we didn't carry that forward either.
And why are we dropping the waterfront dividend?
It's going directly into the CIP fund per our new fund, our enterprise fund policy that we did and approved.
If there is a dividend.
If there is a dividend, absolutely.
from the
Because
water.
we're dropping,
It will go directly into the CIP fund, and then that monies will be utilized for an economic development type of a project.
we're
versus-
dropping more than a penny and a half on the tax rate this year and another penny 16 for other revenues. Okay.
And once again, like Michelle said, based on the condition of the workers' comp fund, we
Yeah.
didn't feel we could justify transferring money
Yeah.
out.
Yep.
Water fund, wastewater, they're already putting in, with light, over $4 million in revenue into the general fund. Didn't feel we could go against the policy that mayor and council adopted within the past 12 months.
On page 9, again, is that same wages and benefits that we had discussed earlier. It's a very good page to have this discussion. I think one of the things that Kristen pointed out, I'll take you part of the way, it's under base wages. It's the very last two lines. You see unfunded position savings, and you'll see a negative in fiscal year 15 budget, a negative $617,000. That represents the 14 unfunded positions that we currently have in the general fund. And in the out years, in fiscal year 17, I've made the assumption that we're going to unfund one of those positions. And then in fiscal year 18, that we're going to unfund another. And in 19, unfund two. So that by the time I get to fiscal year 19, instead of having 14 unfunded positions, we would have 10. Again, if we continue to leave all 14 of those, we can carry that little bit of extra savings across, but you can see it doesn't make that much of a large amount of an impact. That additional vacancy savings, we utilize that in our budget. That would be things such as positions that are funded. So for instance, we currently have a budget officer position that is vacant. So the theory is until that position is filled, we should be realizing some savings. And that does work in some areas and some departments and others. Some of that savings gets utilized in overtime and other things, overusing current staffing that's already there. But again, this schedule is a very good schedule. It's a good reflection. You can see the base wages at the top. There's a line part of the way through that says temporary and seasonal. I just wanted to clarify and let everybody know that temporary and seasonal also includes our regular part-time positions. And you can see in the fiscal year 15 budget, about $692,000 for part-time. And then the fringe benefits. The fringe benefits, we break it out and show the difference between active employees and the cost for the retirees. One of the other things that we did was we added a chart on the very next page just to kind of put it into perspective. And there, just because of the different meetings that we've had and some of the different discussions that we've had on health and dental insurance for active employees, retirees, and the retirement. And I'm just giving a little bit of history on our employer paid cost and what it's looked like since fiscal year 11.
And that's just the general fund on page 9.
That's just a general
From
fund
9
portion.
and
That's
10.
absolutely correct. And there's to look from one year to the next, for the state of Maryland, pension from fiscal year 11 to fiscal year 12 is not necessarily apples to apples because they actually, that was the year they decreased the employer's percentage and increased what the employee had to pay. But that just gives, I mean, in benefits, those are really the big ticket items are health insurance for active employees, retirees, workman's compensation. Again, we're waiting to hear what happens with that. Pretty much everything at the bottom with the fringe benefits, I've got in that projection change column. If there is not a number in that, it means that when the wages at the top change, the numbers at the bottom change. So you can see the health insurance is 5%. It has nothing to do with salaries and wages. I'm just projecting a 5% increase in every out year. Dental, 2.5%, workers' comp, 4%. But everything else will fluctuate and change as changes are made to the salaries at the top. That includes FICA, pension, unemployment taxes. Okay, so
I missed this maybe. I know Marty asked a question. So where in the budget will we then find the highway user revenue report? Will that be in the CIP directly?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I can give you that page number real quick. I just want to come back though while we're in the general fund and looking at this $3.5 million deficit. And so if we look at the rest of the expenses,
So you're back on page 4 now, section
I'm
7.
back on page 4. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Bruce. I'm going to go ahead and take us almost to the bottom of the page where it says capital outlay transfers to CIP. In fiscal year 16, you see that we got $2.015 million. We know realistically that we cannot do that, and that the goal would be to be sustainable and to be putting money and investing in our infrastructure and our vehicles, equipment replacement. 1.2 million is a good goal looking at our history and our trends. So we know that we need to do something about that $2 million. So what I'm going to do is we are going to go ahead and flip back to the capital improvement section. And we're going to look at section 9, page 16 and 17, because I want you to see the specific projects that make up that $2 million. And then what I'm going to say with that $2 million is that there are items in that $2 million in fiscal year 16 that I have deferred. I deferred in 13, I deferred in 14, and I have deferred in 15. So there's definitely some projects in fiscal year 16 that total that $2 million that have already been deferred for some time. You probably have several managers that would tell you that yes, I have made those adjustments. Actually, most of them will tell you that. One of the big things I want to point out in this $2 million, the assumption is that if you look on page 16 at the very bottom, second line up from the top, you see that I'm putting $350,000 there is PAYGO money from general fund. I am assuming that we are not going to get additional funding from highway user above and beyond our average of about $330 to $340. We got a one-time additional in fiscal year 14. We're getting a one-time additional in fiscal year 15. But the reality and some of the articles and some of the things that I've been seeing and hearing, and Marty, you probably know better than I, looks like we cannot continue to put that in our budget and count on it going forward because it is indeed one time.
It's better to assume the conservative number.
That's what this
So
is.
that's what this
Yeah,
represents.
that's right. I think we talked about that. Yeah.
So if something happens and we would get an increase from the state in highway user revenue, there's an easy $350,000 that we would
Right.
save out of operations.
Just for public perspective, what was the largest amount that highway revenues were?
It was just under 1.9 million. It was right around 2 million that we were historically seeing.
And they dropped during the recession to what?
They dropped as
We
low as
lost
7
about
to
90%.
9%.
Yeah, we lost about
They were.
90%.
7 to
About
9%. They're up to, I
300.
yeah, but I mean, in terms of percent, they're up to almost half.
Yeah.
But that's a one-time, two one-time things. We don't know to what extent that
Well,
will
right,
hold
yeah.
up. We've been working to try to get it incorporated into the, to the state as a regular thing, but both Mako and MML have not been able to carry the day on
I
that.
understand that. The point I'm trying to make is when you have that situation where you've lost all that money and your tax base has fallen too, there's not very many good alternatives.
And we were relying on that money in our operations within the general fund instead of utilizing that highway user revenue in the CIP. It's not saying it's right, it's not saying it's wrong, it's not good, it's bad. It's just a different perspective and a different way strategically that we're looking at.
So when we lost it, it really impacted general fund operations because we were so reliant on the state highway user revenue to support the general fund. And with it fluctuating so much, and with this desire to try to support pavement preservation, if you remember Rodney's presentation last fall, where he said about $700,000 a year is our minimum we need just to keep pace with our schedule, we're trying to keep that money for pavement preservation and
Right.
other public improvements in our infrastructure.
And what we'll do is we'll kind of walk down through these, but I'm just going to sidebar and go back to Kristen. Kristen, on that same page, on page 16, you see that state highway user revenue? You'll see what we have,
You
the
see the drop
projects. You'll see
between
the-
this year and
Correct.
the estimate.
And that shows you how we're proposing to spend that money this year.
Right, and that represents
coming
all of
year.
the highway user revenue,
Right.
right there. Okay. So in our transfers in fiscal year 16, we have some monies for some computer equipment and software, monies for municipal broadband. We have, right now, we're estimating just shy of $183,000 for fire department vehicle replacement. And I will tell you, that includes a refurbishment to an engine that I have deferred 3 years. Pavement preservation, again, if we get additional highway user revenue to help offset that 350 additional that we need, that would be great. Some public works vehicles, I have deferred those. Pavement markings, police radios, this is, they had upgraded several years ago, and now we're to the point where, starting in fiscal year 16, we need to start looking at replacing several of those on an annual basis. So that's with the $175,000 you see there. Right underneath that, you see police vehicles, then engineering vehicles. Gonna lose my place.
Michelle, we probably don't have to go through each one of these, but
Okay.
for mayor and council, it gives you an idea of what's in the 2 million.
Yeah.
Right.
It's going to need to be cut probably at least in half a year from now to get the budget balanced, and we know that, but we wanted to show you at least, based on the requests that have already been trimmed down and deferred, because there's no single big-ticket items in there. They're basic infrastructure and capital equipment for the city.
Well, the 2 million's within that $3.5 million deficit here.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
So that's another way of looking at it.
It is. And so
Right, it's
again,
part of that 3 million fund.
it is part of that 3.5 million. So if there's things there that we can reduce, that reduces to 3.5 million. You know, one of the other options is, do we want to look at utilizing fund balance for one-time projects for a second year? I would say that that's probably not best case scenario. That's not what any of the rating agencies wish to see. Definitely does not help sustainability. And just as a reminder, fiscal year 16 will be the year that our fund balance is going to see the adjustment on the audit side for doing the unfunded pension liability and all that to our financial statements. So just a reminder. But if you come back and look at the other expenditures, again, there are some things there that we know need to be dwindled down so that it's not going to definitely be 3.5 million. It's just 3.5 million based on all the requests and where we are right now.
What page is the debt service table?
Page 12.
12.
And what I did on the debt service table is at the bottom, and I tried to do it in such a way that we could easily identify future bond proceeds. I included the estimate for interest rate and the terms, and I tried to put them in italics just so that it stood out what's future versus what we've already have that's totally committed. one of the other things is back in that same section on those same pages, you'll actually see the projects that are utilizing the fund balance, or I'm sorry, bond financing as a funding source. And if we go to the detail on that specific project, I've included an estimate for just that project's impact on the debt service.
I think in general, Michelle, could we summarize in terms of for the coming year and the next 2 years? We're looking at the 1.5 million for downtown.
Yes,
We're looking at the melt project and the 2 ladder trucks.
yes.
Those are the 4 primary drivers of our general fund debt service. The parking fund debt service wouldn't be in here.
That's correct. And those are the biggest ticket, again, as Bruce said, and basically all that we have in the general
And
fund.
so really on the general fund expenditure side, you've got three factors coming into play in terms of those projections. On the expenditure side, you got wages and benefits combined. You've got that capital expenditure projection, the 2 million that we talked about, and debt service. Those are the 3 primary things or categories of expenditures pushing our projections. And we haven't assumed any use of fund balance in FY16. We didn't like doing it in 15, and we didn't want to do it again in 16.
Right.
So I think getting back to Councilmember Elshire's question too on that number, the 3.5 in effect becomes the difference between our projected expenditures and our projected current revenues.
Absolutely. And any adjustments that we would make in 15 that would also carry forward to 16. So for instance, say workman's comp, say Christmas comes early this year. Workman's comp comes in under our 1.35 million. That would be fantastic. That would help 15. It would also help 16 in the out years, hopefully. But I've only included a modest 5% growth. I don't think that workman's compensation increases are going to decline anytime soon or even level out. Not unless there's serious changes done with the way that the law currently stands with the state of Maryland and workers' compensation.
And Michelle, if we could, when we talked about the capital expenditures,
Yes.
the transfers to the CIP, we focused on FY16. But what I think is worth mentioning in terms of this whole sustainable operations point is, in FY15, we only have 215,000 in current revenues supporting our capital. We had to supplement that with the 589 from the general fund reserve. But in better days, before the recession, that figure was generally 1.2 million was our target. So we're about $1 million below where we should be. That's why Michelle's talking about all these deferrals. And that's another indication of some of the structural weakness in our budget. We're not covering our capital and expenditure costs in the general fund.
And then also on page 4, just at the very, very bottom, we've included the information on what each penny gets in revenue, just so that hopefully
which
within
page?
these financial projections, you
Which
could see it
page?
at a glance.
Page 4.
Okay.
I'm so sorry, page 4.
It's about 3 or 4 lines up from the bottom.
Hoping to kind of capture and snapshot everything within those 2 pages.
And what we've done in prior years is you've made budget adjustments. We'll do the budget adjustments for 15 and also show the impact on 16, because you really do need to keep an eye on this as a multi-year budget. So if you make adjustments on revenues or expenditures in the general fund, we'll show the impact on both years so that you're aware of what that means in a year from now.
Certainly. And then I do want to just jump us just one quick comment. I do want to jump us to section 3 to page 2. And I won't go through all of it because we've kind of looked at and discussed fiscal year 15 compared to fiscal year 14 budget. We've walked you through revenue in the departments. But if we look at page 2, where I want to shift our focus just for a moment is at the very, very bottom. And that is general fund and unassigned fund balance. So at the very bottom of the page, in fiscal year 15 budget, you will see unassigned. If we end 14 close to where we are currently, and nothing else changes with our commitments with our fund balance, with what is included in the 15 budget, our unassigned would be at 7.7 million. And if you look at the bottom, that puts us at 19.5%. So that using our fund balance of $588,500 to fund capital projects does have an impact on our fund balance, and you can see it there. The 19.5, to put it in perspective, GFOA best practices say 16.67%. Our city policy at this time says 10%. And then again, just one more time, a reminder that fiscal year 16, we have to record on the audit the impact of our unfunded pension liabilities. And that will have a big impact on our citywide financials.
Do we have an idea what that is?
I should have read that with me. It's over
Okay, well, I
30
think
million.
that'd be a good thing to have when we look at this fund balance.
Oh, it makes us a negative. It's way more than 7.7 million.
Okay.
If you remember when Bill Seymour was here, I think
Sure.
it was 30, but
Any other questions or comments from Michelle? I know this is a lot of information. We do have this on our agenda for tomorrow afternoon's work session, so in case you go home and sleep on it tonight, if you sleep these days, and have any questions for staff, I really do encourage you to work with Michelle and Bruce individually to get any questions you have answered and try to get clarity. But certainly we'll be back here tomorrow, and be a good time to raise those questions too.
Yep. Well, I see the first item for tomorrow is discussion of general fund adjustments.
Yeah,
So that is,
we were hoping we could get into
the
that.
staff is
at
trying
least by
to
tomorrow.
set us up for, or outline.
And we have deviated a little bit from the schedule from tonight, but I still think that we covered
Sure.
the majority of the topics, and it seemed that everybody was okay and had an understanding of what was included in the 15 budget. So
Even if we don't like the
Yeah,
picture.
we have an understanding.
still at least
And
know what it
that's
looks
on.
like.
So then for tomorrow evening, can we assume when we're back on at 6 o'clock for budget that that's what we'll focus on? Discussion of general fund adjustments?
We'll start right there. Well, I think that does it for the evening. Why don't we'll start with Marty, and we can do comments if you want to start, and we can go around.
Oh, I don't have any particular comments
Oh.
this evening.
I'm sorry, I should have started with you.
No, that's
We're going to
okay.
have comment tomorrow
Yeah.
in a regular session.
Right. Anyone else want to make any comments? Or? All right.
Yeah, let me
Please.
just make a comment. Over the weekend, I had a death in my family. And
Sorry
so I
to hear
will
that.
not be here tomorrow night. I'll be here earlier in the day, but not tomorrow evening. I've carefully reviewed what we're going to be doing, and I think I pretty well understand. And if I have any questions, I'll ask.
Yeah, you know where to find us.
And let me just say one thing. This is a very small thing, but I want to express my gratitude for something. In an alley close by, there's been some trash sitting for the better part of a year. And I've mentioned it before. And last week, I guess it was, Eric and his people picked it up and got rid of it. And I want to say I'm grateful for that. It's near the University of Maryland. It's one of those alleys. And it was in front of a door entitled 87 Wareham Place. And I frankly think that the owner of that place has a responsibility for taking care of his or her own trash. And I would appreciate it if the city would make sure that the individual who owns that property is cognizant of that responsibility in the future. Our people shouldn't have to be picking up their trash. So it's 87 Wareham Place, located in an alley just off of Franklin.
Is that where the alleys intersect? It's like that back
Yes, it is.
Door,
It's
yeah.
right past the rug shop.
Back behind the Hamilton
Just,
Hotel.
yes, just past the rug shop. And Eric, I'm very grateful that you all took care of that. Thank you.
And with that, we will say good night. We are adjourned. Thank you. Indeed.